Hi everyone, my name is Joanne and I'm a mental health counselor and the owner of Blue Sky Counseling Services in Apex, North Carolina. And I'm also a partner and caregiver to a loved one who experienced the major health crisis of a stroke. And like many of you, I found myself thrust into the role of caregiving very suddenly, and it was a role I wasn't prepared for. So I'd like to start today by asking two questions. And the first is, do you dislike what caregiving is doing to you or your life? And is it even difficult to think that you have these thoughts or have had these thoughts? If so, I promise you, whether it's been recent or long-standing, there's no shame in these thoughts. It's normal to feel this way when you've been thrust into a role you weren't prepared for. And it's likely the feelings didn't just start in the initial days or weeks, or even the months following your loved one's event or decline. You care for them, your partner, your parent, your spouse, your sibling, maybe even your child. And you want to help them. You want to support them. But it's likely you just weren't fully prepared for all that the caregiver role demands. And that is perfectly understandable because most of us aren't medical professionals. We're family members or friends trying to do the best we can. We show up, we attempt to be present, we help as we can. But in everything that happens and as time marches on, we can find ourselves on a slow journey through stress to burnout. So I'd like to take a moment and share with you a few of the lessons that I've learned through the years as a caregiver. And the first and most important is that caregiving can really impact both our psychological and our physical health. Ongoing high levels of stress, anxiety, depression, and other mental health effects are common among all caregivers. Difficult feelings and thoughts and emotions about caregiving don't necessarily mean that you're unloving. Caregivers often wear a hat that doesn't always fit. I've learned that caregiving can be a confusing and lonely and a very frustrating and overwhelming journey. And the nature of your relationship with your loved one may change in ways that neither one of you were prepared for or even care for. But caregiving can be a rewarding experience. It's likely you may know that already, but it can stress out even the most resilient people. Through my combination of caregiving and my professional background as a counselor, I provide caregivers and families with emotional and psychological support as they move through their caregiver journey. It's so important that you care for yourself and get support for yourself. So again, while caregiving may not always be a stress-free journey, there are many things that we can do to learn about the process and to take care of ourselves as we move along. So I'd like to start by sharing some information about the overall impact of caregiving. It's estimated that 67.5 million Americans ages 18 and older provide unpaid assistance and support to older adults or those in decline or those with disabilities who live within the community. And that accounts for 29% of adults in the US population as caregivers, or 31% of all US households. Those are pretty big numbers. Family caregivers, who are those who are not professionally trained, average 24 hours a week providing care. That's a full day. And 75% of family caregivers are women. 1/4 of all caregivers spend 41 hours or more a week providing care. That's more than a full-time job. That's an awful lot of time. The average spousal caregiver, the caregiver who is caring for a spouse specifically, is approximately 62 years old or older, which is higher than the average of 49 for the average caregiver. Studies show us that higher levels of depressive symptoms and mental health problems are common among caregivers as compared to their non-caregiver peers. This is certainly, again, understandable given the level of stress and the constant overwhelm that can come with caregiving. As many as 50% of caregivers meet the diagnosis for major depression. With these depressed caregivers are more likely to have something called a co-occurring anxiety disorder, a co-occurring disorder, including anxiety, which means something else at the same time as depression. And that can include anxiety, maybe substance abuse or dependence, and chronic disease. Caregiving can also result in a feeling of a loss of our sense of identity, because we become so marred in the caregiving role, we can easily lose ourselves in who we are. Caregivers experience, in general, lower self-esteem, constant worry, or feelings of uncertainty. And more than 1/5 of caregivers are absolutely exhausted when they go to bed at night, leaving many feeling they can't handle all the caregiving responsibilities. That's a heavy load. Caregivers who experience chronic stress, we know that it's likely that they're at greater risk for their own cognitive decline due to the constant overwhelm and stress on their system. Caregivers often put themselves and their needs last. This often leads to caregiver burnout. So today we're going to discuss the 3 stages of caregiver stress, how to know the signs and red flags, and what you can do to help yourself as a caregiver. And so in the caregiver burnout journey, we start with caregiver stress. We move to caregiver burnout if we're not careful, and we can end at a stage called compassion fatigue. And this is a stage that we don't hear a lot about, and I'm going to explain as we progress. You know, caregiver stress is that slow feeling that begins to mount as we're in the caregiving role. Starts early, starts sometimes just after our loved one's health event or serious decline. And it's the first sign that we're not likely doing well or getting the emotional, physical support we need. It includes feelings of frustration and disappointment as they begin to increase due to our loved one's condition. Maybe their slow lack of progress, maybe their slow recovery, adjusting our expectations to what we thought would be, to what really is. But we feel this frustration mounting, and it's disappointment. At the stress stage, we may have difficulty accepting that our loved one's health, their progress, or maybe their decline or emotional state aren't related to our caregiving. We may take on this piece thinking that if they were just getting better, if I was just doing more, they'd be feeling better, they wouldn't be declining. And that's actually a whole lot of stress and likely untrue. Building frustrations lead to caregiver stress. It's so important to know these signs of caregiver stress, and some of them include becoming easily irritated or angry, feeling increasingly down, depressed, or maybe even beginning to feel a little bit hopeless about the situation, feeling overwhelmed or increasingly worried. That's starting to go beyond just everyday stress. The caregiver role can be extremely overwhelming. We may be having increasing trouble concentrating or focusing, or maybe even remembering things because our head is so full of worry and overwhelm. In terms of physical symptoms, we can see an increase in our blood pressure. We may be having increasing difficulty sleeping. We may feel a tightness in our chest as a result of feeling overwhelmed, constantly stressed. This is a sign, if you're feeling chest tightness, that you're feeling stressed and anxious. And, the exacerbation of physical symptoms, things like frequent headaches or physical pain, are signs of stress, that stress is mounting within our body and within our we want to make sure that we see the signs of physical problems as part of caregiver stress. We need to make sure that we address them in the moment so that things don't continue to increase. Because as we sit in our stress and we move through our days, we're attending to our loved one, we're trying to juggle it all, we're feeling more and more stressed, and we know it largely. It is at this point that we must interrupt the process and do something and take care of our emotional and physical health. We must ask for help from others. But many times we don't. We continue to push through. We continue to charge on. We feel that if we're not doing that, we're not doing our best. And the truth of the matter is there's nothing of the sort. This is not true. And when we tell ourselves this and we believe this and we operate as though we're going to allow ourselves increasing stress, absolutely not good for us, not good for our loved one either. Because if we take on too much stress for too long and we don't care for ourselves and we don't see the symptoms and signs, the next step is the caregiver burnout. And caregiver burnout is a state of emotional and mental and physical exhaustion. And it is caused by prolonged and overwhelming stress of caregiving. Signs of caregiver burnout are serious. They're really serious. Because once you're burnt out, it is tough to function, let alone even care for someone else. Some of the signs that you've moved from stress to burnout include a significantly decreased energy level, not just feeling tired, not just feeling a little exhausted, maybe needing a nap, but significantly decreased energy that we can't seem to surmount. Trouble relaxing, maybe even trouble relaxing when someone comes in to help us, or to help us or our loved one. We just can't seem. We're hyped up all the time. We're in high gear all the time. We're anxious all the time. We simply just can't relax. We see neglecting responsibilities as part of caregiver burnout, or maybe procrastinating, doing things that you just don't want to do. Definitely a sign of burnout. Withdrawing socially from friends and family. This is a big, big sign of caregiver burnout. And we must understand that it's not healthy. We're social beings. We function in the social context. We don't thrive in isolation. So it's absolutely important that you understand that when you start to withdraw socially from friends and family, perhaps not wanting to answer the phone, not wanting to answer the door, avoiding answering emails, these are signs that we are at the caregiver burnout stage. Losing interest in our own pleasurable activities, things that we love to do, things that are interesting to us. As we become burnt out, we have less and less energy for ourselves, let alone our caregiving role. And we've just lost all interest in participating in things that were fun. Increased negative thinking is a big sign of caregiver burnout. Can't seem to get yourself out of that negative thought cycle. Can't seem to find anything positive. You've definitely entered the caregiver burnout stage as a result of continued stress that was unattended. Feeling increasingly resentful toward your loved one is another sign of caregiver burnout, or not only your loved one, but the caregiver role. Decreased patience and tolerance, not just little annoyances as we saw in the caregiver stress stage, but significantly decreased patience and tolerance. Perhaps even anger outbursts that are uncharacteristic of you. An increase in apathy is also part of caregiver burnout. Just getting so overwhelmed that you're starting just not to care. Becoming very apathetic. Not positive, not negative, just not caring much. Increased stimulant use is also common at the burnout stage, as we're feeling so depleted. we're trying to keep ourselves going, we're trying to keep ourselves on and pushing forward. So we may choose stimulants like more coffee, more caffeine, alcohol use, or even tobacco use as an increase. It's important to understand that this kind of increased use is usually a way we're starting to try to cope because we're feeling burnt out. And also a change in our eating patterns or our sex drive. Those are definitely signs of caregiver burnout. We're not taking care of ourselves. And so as we simply look at the continuum of caregiver stress into burnout, the difference in these stages is the severity of our symptoms. And they come as we move through the process and our days move on, our role is long, and we're not seeing the signs initially, or we're telling ourselves, no, I can't do anything about it. I must move on. There's nobody to help. I can't take a break. And the truth is that that is not true. We can and we must. And it's important to start early. And if you haven't started early and I'm catching you already in the process, it's important to start now. Because if we don't see the signs of caregiver stress and caregiver burnout, we may end up at a stage called compassion fatigue. And compassion fatigue is unlike caregiver burnout. It results from exposure to another person's traumatic event, and it creates high levels of emotional stress and despair. It's actually secondary trauma or secondary traumatic stress disorder. You know, we see compassion fatigue usually in the occupational realm. It's very common among frontline workers, EMS workers, nurses, even social workers and counselors, people who are continuously, as a result of their work, exposed to chronic stress and chronic emotional impact. And you know, one thing we know about those that experience this in the occupational realm is if it goes too far, they often will leave the profession because it's just become too overwhelming. But often people in the occupational realm have support to move through the fatigue stage to return to balance. That includes mental health days off. It can include vacation time. It can include employee assistance programs that provide psychological and emotional support. And so in the occupational realm, while this is common, we also see that those in these roles often do get support. That's different than a loved one, a family, a friend providing caregiving. There's usually little support. And so if we don't take time to help ourselves, to reach out and to see those signs, we're going to experience the secondary trauma that comes from not attending to this constant exposure that comes with the caregiver role. So a key difference between caregiver burnout and compassion fatigue is that weakened sense of empathy toward the loved one or the care recipient. We're just becoming less empathetic and sympathetic to their situation and their needs or their decline. This is an exhaustion stage where most people finally realize that something's wrong, even though you've had perhaps a nagging feeling of stress, even realized that things were becoming overwhelming and that you were burnt out already. This stage of compassion fatigue is exhaustion. And it is unfortunate, but many times we don't do something until it comes to this stage. At this point, emotional and psychological support are needed, absolutely needed. And it's critical to recognize the red flags of compassion fatigue. And some of these include feeling overwhelmed and completely exhausted and drained. Again, on the continuum, not just stressed, not just burnt out, but almost immobile at this stage. Increased cynicism is also a sign of compassion fatigue, as well as feelings of hopelessness and meaningless. We're losing ground. Our efforts, we feel hopeless. We're trying. Things aren't getting better. Our loved one isn't improving. It's not going the way we thought it could be. No matter our interventions and despite our best efforts, things aren't changing. We're starting to feel a sense of meaninglessness in our caregiving role. We can also experience nightmares and flashbacks of our loved one's event. We're constantly replaying over and over things that happened, or if we've just done something different, constant exposure to our loved one's event, sign of compassion fatigue, as well as chronic physical ailments, not just what you saw at the stress stage, not just what you saw at the burnout stage, but now things have just become chronic. Gastrointestinal problems are common, heart palpitations, and aches and pains that just won't go away. This is a sign that we are at the compassion fatigue stage. When we start to severely neglect our own activities of daily living, like caring for our own hygiene and appearance and taking care of our meals and nutrition, this is a sign of compassion fatigue. We have reached well beyond the burnout stage. We may be even using substances to mask or cope difficult feelings or overwhelm. Avoiding work, friends, and family. Perhaps showing up chronically late for work if you work outside the home, missing deadlines, not wanting to go, feeling like you want to stay in bed, just pulling the covers up over your head, not answering the phone, not answering the door, avoiding invitations for family events or social events. These are signs that we're in the compassion fatigue stage. We're completely overwhelmed. We may find also at this stage, we feel a desire to drop out of society. We're well past that stress and burnout stage. We just want to drop out. We just can't go on. The thoughts of suicide as a means to escape are signs we're at the compassion fatigue stage. And if we see this, we must get help now. We absolutely must. We must see the signs that if we're having these thoughts, we need to ask for help. We need to have somebody come in and sit with our loved one or take care of them so that we can get the emotional and psychological and physical help that we need. At this point, pushing through is not possible. We must take ourselves offline and take care of ourselves so we can restore and recover. Compassion fatigue exists on a spectrum, just like the others, stress and burnout. When we're at the fatigue stage, we're starting to know we're well past burnout. It's important to know where you are in the fatigue stage. You know, each caregiver, each one of us has our own limits. And so it's important to know your limits. And it's important to set limits, not only setting limits with others, but setting limits with yourself. Because, you know, once we're at this level of indifference or insensitivity that's developed as a result of going too far with stress and burnout, absolutely have to step back from the caregiving role, at least temporarily. If you do this, if you catch yourself, things won't get worse. At least you have a chance to interrupt the process. Because, you know, in terms of interrupting this process, there are things that you can do and ways to take care of yourself as a caregiver. And I want to discuss these now. We're going to look at planning, which is essential, and caring for yourself, which is essential, and educating yourself, which is absolutely essential. And in this planning piece, we're looking at building our own care team. Now, for those of you who are just starting in your caregiving role, this is very important. But certainly if you're already into your caregiver journey, it's absolutely possible to build a care team if you don't have one present. What you want to do is you want to make sure you don't go it alone. You want to tap into family and friends and neighbors, maybe those in your church or those in your local community, your surrounding community, maybe your neighborhood, volunteer organizations, or organizations such as care.com, who provide support for caregivers and their loved ones. By building a team, you'll make sure you don't go it alone, because it really does take a village. And so I know if you're already into the journey, or if you've started, you know, just responding as needed, you're probably already doing much more than you need to alone. And so you may say, how do I start to build a care team? Well, what you need to do is you need to sit down and look at all your needs, and then you need to answer the question from people when they ask, how can I help? What can I do? start to think about assignments that you can give and ways that you can let people help you and help your loved one to build an entire team instead of going it alone. It's really important to create a calendar for the team once you have anything more than just yourself. Even just 2 people are a team, but hopefully you'll have more people on your team. You want to create a calendar so everybody understands what appointments have to happen, what your loved one needs, who is to go where, what people are signing up for. And an internet-based system is really a terrific way to go. There are a couple of examples here are Lots of Helping Hands or the Caring Bridge, and you can find these online, and you can look at them to see how they meet your needs. But if you don't feel comfortable in the online environment, then at least use a paper calendar system like Passion Planner or Date Timer, something that others can see, maybe something that you can take a picture of and send to people on the team on a regular basis, something that you can keep present so that there's an overall calendar for everyone. It is essential to stay organized and organized from the start. And if you're already into the caregiving role and you haven't done this, it's likely that you know this. And if you're just starting out, make sure that you stay organized and keep in one place emergency phone numbers and health records, medication and allergy records for your loved one, and any kind of special instructions that anyone would need if they had to step into your caregiving role or help your loved one. Also include the names and all the details for medical providers. One good way to stay organized is to use caregiving apps. And if you are not comfortable with a smartphone or using apps, this is a great opportunity for you to answer that question from others when they say, how can I help? For people on your team, this is how you can help. You can help me learn about how to use these apps. Several of them include CareZone and MediSafe. There are two to look at to start. There are many others, and once you have a chance to explore, you'll see which one best meets your needs and feels most comfortable to you. Using visuals is also really important in terms of overall planning. You want to post where everyone can see either a big whiteboard or a chalkboard or maybe a dry erase wall calendar, so that you and everyone else on the team and your loved one can see what has to happen, what's going on that day, what the needs are. You can even use motivational quotes and date and weather, to-do lists, certainly. And if your loved one can't process words, you can use pictures to show them pictures of others who are going to help them, or symbols of things that are time for medication. So get creative with your visuals, but it's a really good idea to use visuals and post it in a place where everyone can see it, so it has immediate and easy access. Caring for yourself, absolutely essential. It is absolutely essential that you give yourself breaks. Caregiving can be very overwhelming. It can be very frustrating. Times we can find ourselves very, very angry and frustrated. At this point, you need to take a time out, walk away, take deep breaths to calm, go outside and get some fresh air. If you're not able to interrupt the process at the moment, as soon as you possibly can, break away from your loved one and get some space for yourself and breathe and stretch. Maybe try some yoga when you can, or meditation. There are terrific apps that can help you, guide you through the process. A few of them are Calm and Headspace and Insight Timer. And if you're not comfortable, have someone show you how to use them, because sometimes we can't even think about how to give ourselves a timeout. These are terrific ways to do that, terrific guides and tools. Okay, so in caring for yourself, when people ask you, what can I do? You must tell them what they can do for you, not just your loved one. It's normal as a caregiver to immediately think, what can you do? What can you do for my loved one? In this particular case, I mean, what can they do for you? Have a list of ways on hand. And what I mean by this is, in addition to people helping you with your loved one, you want them to help you. So If you have on your list that you'd like to take a class at the gym, or you'd like to go shopping, or you'd like to go spend some time with friends, one of the ways some people can help you is to come into your home and maybe spend time with your loved one, maybe take your loved one to a movie, maybe read to your loved one continuously once a week, maybe an audio book. Maybe sit with your loved one and play Scrabble or get involved in some kind of hobby they may be able to engage in. Maybe take your loved one for a walk or a drive so that they can help you to get out so that you can get time for yourself. That can be, of course, something inside the home. Maybe you want to take a long bath, but something for you. Tell people what they can do to help you. And if you work and you feel comfortable doing so, share your situation with your employer. You're going to need this support if you work. Sometimes your employer will be willing to work out flex time, maybe, or shared responsibilities and help you in some way so that you can provide for your loved one as a caregiver. Now, of course, this is very subjective. You have to feel comfortable, but there are many advantages to telling your employer, or maybe telling people, in your human resources group so they can help you as the caregiver. Make time to get out without your loved one. This means, again, on those list of things that you enjoy doing, make time for one of them every week, not with your loved one, but alone or socially with friends or with family. Whether it be, again, playing tennis, getting together with friends, getting involved in an activity that you enjoy, such as photography or maybe crocheting, maybe reading, maybe a group at the library, maybe a book club, that you want to make time to get out without your loved one, to get away, to change your scenery, to interact with others. And so keep a list going so you'll always know, this is what I'm doing this week. This is what I'm focusing on. This is what I'm making that commitment for. And I know we often will say, I just can't get away. But I must tell you that you absolutely can if you plan for it. And it is absolutely essential. If you don't, the stress will move to burnout and so on. Respite care for the provider is something that provides temporary relief. For someone to come in. If you don't have friends or family or people within the community that can or are willing to help, you can tap into respite organizations. You can look on the internet at ARC, which is the National Respite Network, for those who provide respite care within your community to help you. When we speak about respite care, we even think about taking a vacation without your loved one. And that includes, again, there may be a time that you and your loved one can go away together, and that takes some planning, and there are organizations that can help with that. But it's really important not only to take those little breaks, but to take a couple of bigger breaks, whether that's long weekends once a season or a week-long vacation once or twice a year. It is absolutely possible to go on vacation as a caregiver. And there are several ways to look at that, by getting folks to come into your home, ask a relative or sibling to stay with your loved one, pay a daytime caregiver that your loved one may have, or hire a licensed home care aide for short-term help. I often hear people say, I can't do this, I feel guilty. And I must tell you, the word is not guilty, but it's inappropriate guilt, because guilt equals you've done a bad thing, and you're not doing a bad thing if you go on vacation and get some space for yourself. It is not unloving. It's an act of strength and not only self-preservation, but it's loving for your loved one, because you're taking time to care for yourself so you can care for them. Take time for your own self-care. This cannot be understated, and I'm sure you probably heard it well before this presentation, but it bears repeating over and over again. You must take time for self-care, your physical health, to eat well, to exercise regularly, whatever that exercise looks like to you, to keep a consistent sleep schedule, because so often we know that caregivers neglect their needs, and it comes at a great expense. You must eat well. If you don't have time to prepare meals because you're overwhelmed by your caregiver role, pay your nutritionist to make meals for you. There are a number of different services. You can home delivery services where you can have groceries or pre-prepared meals delivered to your home, where you can put them in the freezer and take them out when you need to have a healthy meal. You want to make sure you don't skip meals. You need to keep your energy. You want to exercise regularly in some way, even if it's just light stretching or maybe watching a video on television and doing chair exercises, to getting out for a run or going to the gym, going just for a simple walk around the block, exercise regularly, move your body, process the stress, keep a consistent sleep schedule. We know that caregivers consistently shave off sleep. And it is really difficult to sustain stress when we're not getting enough sleep. So we must keep to a consistent schedule. We must set that expectation for ourselves. And as you do, you'll set that expectation for your loved one. And they'll know when it's time for you to sleep, when it's time for you to go home, when it's time to turn out the lights. And caring for your health also includes your emotional and mental health too. It's so important to get the support you need in a non-judgmental setting, to work with a mental health professional. And if you haven't done this yet, as a caregiver, it's never too late to start. Family and friends are wonderful, and they love us and they care. And they often tell us what they think we want to hear, but they don't always act as an objective third party for us to process our full feelings. So working with a mental health professional will allow you to have that space to process. It can be somebody to help you problem solve and be there for you to take care of your emotions. It's absolutely essential. Caring for yourself also includes attending support groups, because caregiving is so isolating. You want to be with others who share your caregiving experience. Again, family and friends are wonderful, and we absolutely need them for support. But sharing with those who share your caregiving experience is a specific kind of support that we need as caregivers. Some examples of groups include caregivers of stroke survivors or caregivers of those with dementia. And there are many groups in your local area. It's just a matter of finding them. You can ask around. You may ask your loved one's providers. If your loved one has a therapist that they work with, you can ask them if they know of support groups in the area. You can even call local hospitals and ask them if they have a list of caregiver support groups in the area. And in some cases, you can attend these support groups with your loved one, and it's something you can do together. But then there's also those that you do for yourself, to be just with caregivers. The group is a sharing experience, but it's not required that you share. You can just listen. They can also provide educational support with guest speakers. It can be really useful. They can also help expand your resources in your area. Some examples of caregiver groups just in one area of the country in one specific situation are caregiver groups in the Raleigh, North Carolina area for those who are supporting a loved one who has had a stroke. And so we look at three here, and one is a stroke support group that is held at the University of North Carolina in their rehab center. And there's another one for the folks who are supporting and survivors of traumatic brain injury at one of the local hospitals. And then across town at another hospital, there's a stroke support group that meets regularly. And as you can see, these groups meet monthly. And so what I would suggest is developing a list of caregiver groups in your area and attending each one to see which one best fits your style and of course your schedule. And so education. it is essential to learn as much as you can about your loved one's situation or disease state. And the reason for this is because the better educated you make yourself, the less overwhelmed you'll feel. So often the problem is there's so much uncertainty and so much we don't understand about what's happening, if we will, what's normal and what's not for a loved one, given the stage that they're at, giving our caregiving efforts. And so learning about the disease state of a loved one is essential. It's estimated by the National Caregiver Alliance that caregivers spend 13 days per month, maybe not 13 consecutive days, but overall collectively, what amounts to about 13 days per month, trying to educate themselves about their loved one situation and resources and support services. And that's an awful lot of time. And so one of the best ways to find this information is to get to the internet, or to have, again, if you don't feel comfortable with the internet or things that are online, ask somebody to sit with you and help you to find this information. And some examples would be the American Stroke Association, or the Brain Injury Association of America, or the Alzheimer's Association. It's likely you'll find a group for every disease state that you need. And so in the education realm, you want to educate yourself as a caregiver. And by that I mean, this is the realm of what we call caring for the caregiver. And there are websites, not only support groups, but websites that are available that you can access from your home when you have time, that are supportive of the caregiver. And they include these, I've listed a few here, of caring.com, or the Family Caregiver Alliance and the National Family Caregivers Association. And in each one of these sites, there's a section for caregivers. It's a place where caregivers share their stories. They talk about their joys and their sorrows and their frustrations, and they collectively support one another. And so this is another way to get support as a caregiver. Okay, and so, it's true that no one is ever prepared for the reality of something like a stroke or a brain injury, a loved one's decline, or any major health crisis and its consequences. But as caregivers, if we understand the 3 stages, and we understand where we are in the process of caregiver stress, caregiver burnout, and compassion fatigue, we can do this journey well. Because caregiver burnout as a whole is a journey that happens in slow motion. But if we're aware of its negative effects, this can lead to positive change and healing and a new resiliency. It's so important to remember you cannot pour from an empty cup. There are essential things that you can do to take care of your emotional, physical, and psychological health to prevent caregiver burnout. And I know I've mentioned in the presentation before that getting emotional and psychological support is really important for the caregiver. It's so important to find a counselor or mental health professional to work with. Really, ideally, the best way to do this is just after or at the time of your loved one's event or decline. But many times we're so involved in the immediacy of everything that happens and the suddenness that we don't do well in finding support for ourselves. So if you haven't started your journey, I want to recommend that you find a counselor to work with. And if you have, I want to recommend that you find somebody to work to help support you on your journey. And by working with a counselor, you create another aspect of a support system for yourself. Counselors will support you, as I do many, with unconditional positive regard. It's a place that there's no judgment, a place you can just be yourself and process your feelings and share your sorrows and work through problems and just deal with your range of emotions in a safe setting. And if you have somebody to work with through your journey, you'll find the journey can be very helpful on your journey. And there's absolutely no shame in this. As caregivers, we all need support. This is an overwhelming journey and an overwhelming process. And so I really want to recommend you find a counselor to work with. If you don't know where to start, you can ask around. Maybe again, you can ask if your loved one has providers, you might ask if they know somebody who is a counselor who works with caregivers. You can also look on a website called Psychology Today. And on this website, counselors post their profiles and they provide background about who they are and how they work. And you can see if there's one locally for you that might be a fit. Each also provides a 15-minute free consultation, and you can do that by phone or you can do that in the office. Ask the questions, tell them about your situation, and find out if they're the right support for you. Be honest with yourself. Pay attention to your feelings and needs. You must ask others for help. You must. This is absolutely essential. If you try to go this journey alone, you'll become very stressed out and burnt out and likely experience compassion fatigue. It'll have a profound impact on your physical, emotional, and mental health. Ask for help from others. Let them help you. If you weren't comfortable with this prior to your loved one's event or decline, it's likely you're going to struggle with this piece, to ask others for help. But I promise you, there's absolutely no shame in it. You cannot do this alone, and you shouldn't. And again, get support by working with a trained mental health professional, because caring for a loved one may never be stress-free, but you can maintain or regain a sense of balance and hope and joy. And so I hope the information I've provided today in this presentation has been helpful. I understand the caregiver journey. I hope you'll take care of yourself. My information is here. I'd be happy to answer any question you have about this presentation or any questions you have about the caregiver role and support.